It's amazing watching the religious try to fight their way out of a corner that their own beliefs have forced them into. Ultimately, as we all know, they've got absolutely nothing. But they give it the old college try, don't they? And then they fail. Miserably. So, yeah. Off to the show we go. We get back to Cliffe Knechtle today as he tries to convince what appears to be a group of college students that the Gospels are extraordinary by just deflecting all of the contradictions and pretending that they don't exist. The only extraordinary thing here is Cliffe's ability to bullshit an audience. But this is religious apologetics we're talking about, so what else do you expect? Can Cliffe convince anyone of anything except his own blatant dishonesty? Let's go watch and see.
I would be happy to raise my percentage. Why have you accepted the idea that in order to accept his claim to be God, that you have to have some type of extraordinary evidence that you're unable to nail down?
Except we all know that you have absolutely none of that, Cliffe. That's the problem. It's what we've been asking the religious for forever. And you can't provide. None of you can. All you're doing is pretending that this silly book of mythology is in some way impressive. I mean, impressive to you because you really like the idea that that's true. Of course, you can't show that it actually is, and without that, you're not going to convince anyone else. Because there is a fundamental disconnect between the religious who are looking at things purely emotionally and the rest of us who care about the facts. The only way we're going to be impressed with your silly book of multiple choice is if you can prove with objectively verifiable evidence that each and every single bit of it is factually correct. And you can't do that. You don't even try. If you want us to be convinced, you need to get to work.
I don't think faith is a good measure of finding out the truth, so I wouldn't put my faith in anything.
And that's a good point. But the religious have to rely on faith because faith is all that they have. They can't prove that anything that they believe is actually correct. And I think it was Bionic Dance who came up with the word epistivist, which means someone who doesn't rely on faith to make decisions. And I would agree that that's the only rational way that anyone can go. Faith doesn't get you anywhere worthwhile. Faith is a dodge. How do I get to somewhere that makes me feel good without having to show that that place is intellectually justifiable at all? Faith. But faith doesn't actually get you anywhere useful. The religious don't want to talk about that. Every religion has the same faith. The faith that they're right. But they can't all be right, and none of them want to talk about that, do they? They're right. Everyone else is wrong, so there. They have faith. And that's stupid.
Sir, you have tremendous faith. You don't do brain scans to determine love.
You can. We can detect the signs of love in the brain with fMRIs. You do know that love is just a complex electrochemical reaction in the brain, right? It's nothing more than that, no matter what you wish were true. Now, it might feel wonderful to have those chemicals running through your brain, but that doesn't change reality. And that's the difference between them and us. We care about reality, and they don't.
You said you observe people's behavior, and then you make a decision. You don't scientifically prove that someone loves you.
You could. It's not typically necessary, but you could do that if you really wanted to. It's just not something that we would normally do, and in the long run, it doesn't really matter. I don't want to get into relationship stuff here, but we'll let Cliff go off, well, a cliff. I wanted to point out that he's absolutely wrong in absolutely everything that he's saying. If he can't even get the simple stuff right, how can we rely on him to know anything about more complex subjects?
Rather, you observe their behavior and then you come to a decision. It is based on evidence, but it's a faith decision.
Only if you're playing musical definitions, as the religious tend to do. So let's just get this out of the way. When we are talking about religious faith, which is ultimately what all of this comes down to, we mean secure belief in God and a trusting acceptance of God's will viewed as a theological virtue. We mean blind faith. We mean faith in a religion. But what he's talking about isn't religious faith. He's just asserting that we have it because he wants everyone to be just like him. But faith doesn't rely on evidence, and he's already said that you have evidence, so it can't be faith. Once you have an intellectual source to evaluate, faith goes right out the window. You don't need faith anymore, because faith is stupid.
Not a decision.
So now, of course it's a faith decision to trust somebody.
No, it's not. Even he doesn't think that. If you listen to what he just said, you observe their behavior, yada, yada, yada. And you know what we call that, Cliff? We call that evidence. Not faith, evidence. You're an idiot. And I'm sure he's going to go around and around and around like this for a while because Cliff needs people to accept his definition of faith if he wants to get anywhere. And this is why the religious don't like to debate people like me, because I don't let them run around with the goalposts. There have been numerous theists who have tried to debate theological points in the comments on various videos I've put up, and it never works. Ever. They make a claim, I ask them to back it up, and they fail. Until they can prove their claim is true and reasonable to accept, it isn't intellectually valid. But they go right back to making the same claim verbatim because they really have nothing else. And that's the problem with the irrational religious. They care more about their faith than they do about the facts. And I don't give a shit about their faith. I care only about the facts. It's no wonder these two sides can never see eye to eye.
So, why don't you put your faith in Jesus Christ in light of how credible he is?
Because he's not. You haven't demonstrated that. No theist ever has. You have faith based on feelings, not intelligence based on evidence. We're not interested in how you feel. You are only as good as the objectively demonstrable facts that you've got under your belt. And let's be honest, Cliff, you got jack shit.
He's not credible, that's why.
Why is he not credible? Why have you concluded that?
Because it's an extraordinary claim and it does not have extraordinary evidence, and so I would be
Why
happy
have
to
you
raise my
accepted the
percentage.
idea that in order to accept his claim to be God, that you have to have some type of extraordinary evidence that you're unable to nail down?
Because that's how it works. Any claim must have evidence that it's true, such that the claim is demonstrated to be reliable and demonstrably correct in light of it. You can't just say that aliens abducted Elvis and expect anyone to take you seriously without proof. This just takes us back to the absurd belief that everyone is just like the religious are. The idea of Jesus just makes Christians weak in the knees, so yeah, that's got to be true of everyone else too. But what about the idea that Krishna Israel makes Hindus feel good? Doesn't that mean that everyone feels good at the idea of Krishna? Well, apparently not, because Cliff doesn't believe that. But the religious, in their own little religiously mentally poisoned bubbles, only believe their own claims, and they ignore everyone else's, and that's pretty convenient when you think about it. They don't say, well, now that I think about it, that would actually make some sense. Because sense isn't part of their religious worldview. Only faith is. And that's why they get pretty much everything so absurdly wrong.
Because I
You
want
just
to
have
believe.
this theoretical idea of it's got to have extraordinary evidence. Why have you decided that?
Because I only want to believe things that are true, and things that are true require evidence. And the bigger claim of that truth is, the more evidence that you need to believe that it's true.
But that leads to a dishonesty intellectually, because what you're saying is, I move the goalposts.
Yes, you do. You do so constantly. We can prove that to you easily. Now, I've used this example before, but it works here too. If someone ran up to you in the street and said Godzilla was destroying the city, you'd ask for evidence. You wouldn't just go, "Holy shit, Godzilla!" and run away screaming. Not if you had a clue, at least. But if someone said something to you about Jesus, an idea to which you have an emotional commitment, you just go, "Okay, I'll buy that." And it would get past all of your rational filters. This is the problem because you are not evaluating the two situations equally. For one, your brain understands that it's a silly idea and therefore you demand evidence before you believe it. And for the other, your brain is shut off entirely because you've already adopted it as an emotionally comforting belief, and therefore it doesn't have to go through the same filter. And then he gets out into public where he's dealing with skeptics who don't have the same religious mind poison coursing through their veins that he does, and he's trying to convince them that his lunacy is reasonable. And he's not going to do a good job, I assure you.
I have different standards of evidence that I use for different people, different claims.
And that's the problem. But he won't acknowledge it as a problem, will he? He can't. There should be one standard and one standard alone. Your feelings shouldn't matter. Only the fact should.
I don't think that's fair. If it's a historical claim, then I've got to have some tests that I use consistently across the board to determine whether something's historically true.
And we do. The problem is, your beliefs do not measure up. They just don't. And you don't apply your standards across the board to all religions. It only goes for your religion because you only care about your religion. So Cliffe is not only wholly irrational, he's a complete hypocrite. And I really don't think anyone is surprised, do you?
So what are your tests that you use to determine historically whether Jesus really did live a sinless life, teach amazing teachings, die on a cross, and rise from the dead?
Or exist in the first place? That's the question he's not asking, isn't it? Because he's just assuming it to be true because he really wants it to be true, and he's so far gone that he can't even acknowledge that he needs to be asking those questions as well. You don't just get to start with your assumptions and go from there. He doesn't get to presume God and Jesus and the holy spook are real, any more than Hindus get to assume Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu are real without proving that they are. But he's got no way to demonstrate that. None of them do. So they all just sit there and play make-believe. That's all he's doing. It's all he can do.
I'll grant you I wouldn't grant you, but I'll grant you the historical accuracy of the Bible. Still not enough. This still
Why
gets
haven't
me
you
up to
studied
7%.
it yourself?
I have. I read ancient Greek. I know. I've read the New Testament.
Then what's
in
your
its original
conclusion
text.
after studying the text?
It's a horribly, it's not solid foundation. Most of the texts were written 50 to 100 years afterwards. They are if you were to grant the absolute historical truth of everything in the Bible, there's so many contradictions, right? Did Judas die by hanging himself on the fig tree or by falling on a hill and having his
If you try and hang
entrails
yourself,
sewed?
it's quite possible that the knot will slip and you'll fall and your guts will spill out. There's no contradiction.
Okay.
And we're back to bald rationalization. I mean, what else is new? This is really common in religious apologetics because they have no other choices. They're happy to make up explanations for what could have happened and then declaring that's what actually happened. I don't care what could have been. I care what is demonstrably real. You can't say, well, I can just dream up a solution, therefore there's no problem. No, there's a problem until you can prove that your solution, the one that you just made up in your head, is actually what happened in reality. If the writers of the Gospels meant that Judas hung himself and the knot slipped, Well, they should have written that, but they didn't. And the most logical reason why they didn't is because two different authors had two different stories, and now Cliffe comes along and he's desperate to put those stories back together into a single narrative because he needs it so he can feel good about his beliefs. Because his beliefs matter more than the facts, and that's the problem that he refuses to see.
Did the women who went to see Jesus in the tomb, was the tomb closed or was it open when they came?
The tomb was open, and
it was also closed according to Mark. So
if you're such an honest searcher after truth, why do you interrupt me so regularly?
Sorry.
Him? Go back and watch your own video, Cliffe. He spends his time interrupting absolutely everyone. He talks over everyone. He's blind to his own faults. Matthew 7:3, dude. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye?
Go on.
Are you sorry? Or are you going to do it again?
I'll try not to.
Thank you.
Are you? I didn't think so. Grow up, Cliffe. Are you going to do it again? Of course you are. You're being an asshole.
All right. If I say to my wife when I go home, I spoke to one gentleman about the evidence for the New Testament, and then later on I say I spoke to over 10 people, is that a contradiction?
No, it's not, because you specified later on. But that's not what happened in the Bible. The stories aren't written like that. It doesn't say that a couple of women went to the tomb and the rock was there, and then later on another group of women went to the tomb and the rock was gone. And they were all surprised all over again because, they had really bad memories. No, sorry, that's not how it's written. But Cliffe and other apologists have to assume that it's all got to fit together somehow because, obviously, the Bible has to be true. But there's no evidence that it is. That's the problem.
Yes.
No, it's not. If I said I spoke to only one person, and then I say I spoke to 10 people, that would be a contradiction. But if I say I spoke to one person about the veracity of the New Testament, and then later I say I spoke to over 10 people, not a contradiction, two equally valid perspectives on what really happened.
You can actually do that at the same time because when you think about it, that's actually what he's doing in the video, but I guess that's not really the point, is it? This kid is pointing out clear and present contradictions in the Bible, and Cliffe is just waving his arms around going, no, 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 without actually showing that they're not there. He's making a claim without evidence and trying desperately to sweep it all under the rug. There is simply no way to take the words in the Bible in context, put all of them together while adding nothing and taking nothing away, and come up with a cohesive narrative. Now, granted, that's a hard thing to do, but we're talking about a book here that is supposedly the inerrant word of God. How is it that this all-powerful magic man in the sky can get it all so wrong? Oh right, he's not real, I forgot.
I did speak to one person. I also spoke to over 10 people. All right? No contradiction between the Gospels on the resurrection occurrences.
Bullshit. You just tried to fast talk your way around it. It's how apologists operate. And if you've ever been in a group of people around some crazy on a soapbox like this, you'll see that's exactly how they always work. Someone brings up a problem with their theology, they spin some yarn, and then they move on and refuse to talk about it any longer. They hope people aren't really paying attention. But we are. It's just claims without evidence, backed up with more claims without evidence. It's a distraction. It's all they can do.
What about if you told her, I talked to a person who had his hood on, and then later you say, I talked to a person and he had his hood off. Is that false? Is that dishonest? Is that a contradiction? Clearly.
No, because there's a guy out here who I just talked to who had a hood that was not on.
No, you say, this guy named Tarek, I talked to him, and during the conversation, he had his hood on. And then later you say, that same guy during that same time, Tarek, he had his hood off.
That would be a contradiction.
Exactly. That's what happened with the tomb. It says the tomb's open when they came. It says the tomb was closed when they came.
No, it doesn't.
Yes,
Where does it say that?
It says in Mark that the tomb was closed, and I think it's in Samuel or Luke that the tomb was open. You
Samuel doesn't record the resurrection.
If you want to get my contact information, I will send you the verses.
No, show me right now. Come on, you got them. Give them to me.
I mean...
They're not there, sir.
Except they are. And I have a feeling that if this kid whipped out his phone and showed him the verses and completely demolished all of the things that Cliffe was saying, this video would never make it to the internet. And that's another thing that I've seen from the religious. I honestly had someone tell me, in respect to Frank Turek in this case, that he's never been defeated in any of his videos. Well, not in any of the videos that he personally posts on his own channel, he doesn't. Why? Because he's not going to post anything that makes him look bad. That doesn't mean that there aren't things that make him look terrible out there, but he's just not going to be even-handed on his own channel. It's amazing how many people just don't realize that he's not posting absolutely everything that has ever been filmed in the universe. Only the snippets that make him look the way that he wants to look to his audience. People are dumb and gullible. It's really kind of sad.
Okay.
I've studied it in Greek as you have.
Yes.
It's not there.
Yeah, it is. Here are the passages that this kid, and I didn't catch his name, sorry, but here are the passages that he was talking about. Luke 24:2 says, "They found the stone rolled away from the tomb." According to the first verse in that chapter, this was very early in the morning, so it was the first time that they had been there. This also appears in Mark 16:4. But if you go look at Matthew 28:2, you get an entirely different story. When the two Marys got to the tomb, it was still sealed, and only after they had arrived did an angel roll it away. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat upon it. So, as is no surprise, Cliffe is wrong. He knew he was wrong. He was banking on the fact that this kid didn't have a pocket Bible, and if he had, nobody would ever have seen the evidence that he failed online. He's cherry-picking the data that he wants to present. And if he wants to prove me wrong, all he has to do is show me something on his channel where someone got the better of him. We all know that's happened, but we all know it's not on his channel. Show us how honest you are, Cliffe, because we know you can't. The fact is, there are tons and tons and tons of contradictions in the Bible, but the religious can't accept that, so they just make things up. It's why the Gospels are not extraordinary. They are horribly flawed pieces of made-up mythology. They don't prove that any of these events actually happened. It's why historians require, for an event to be considered historical, that multiple independent accounts be presented. And that's not the Bible. The Bible has been tailor-crafted by later councils and the church to be what it is today. These stories were cherry-picked. Now, show me an independent eyewitness account from outside of the Bible that validates any of these events. You can't, because they don't exist. That's why the Bible doesn't prove anything. But Cliffe doesn't like that, so Cliffe never talks about it. No apologist will, because this is all about feelings, not facts. It's about emotions, not evidence. And that makes everything that they have to say laughably absurd. It really does. And they're just not smart enough to see it. If that's not pathetically sad, I really don't know what is.
Boom, dicky, 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 boom.